Hey everyone, welcome back to Real English Voices. I'm Tom, and as always, I'm here with my amazing co-host, Ria. Today, we're diving into something that honestly makes a lot of people nervous, even native speakers sometimes. We're talking about interrupting politely in conversations, especially in group discussions and meetings.
Yes, and Tom, can I just say this is such an important topic because I think so many English learners avoid speaking up in meetings or group conversations simply because they don't know how to jump in without seeming rude.
Exactly. And you know what's funny? I remember when I was younger, I went to this business meeting with my dad, and there was this moment where I really wanted to ask a question, but everyone just kept talking and talking. I sat there for like 20 minutes, and I never got my chance because I didn't know how to politely interrupt the flow.
Oh no, that must have been so frustrating. Did you ever get to ask your question?
Never. And honestly, I left that meeting feeling like I'd wasted an opportunity. That's why I think learning these skills early is so crucial. It's not just about English, it's about confidence and making sure your voice is heard.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Interrupting doesn't have to be aggressive or rude. There are so many ways to do it politely and professionally. Today, we're going to walk through 7 specific techniques that will help you feel comfortable jumping into any conversation.
Perfect. So let's start with the first one, and this is probably the gentlest way to interrupt someone. It's using apologetic phrases. Ria, what do you mean by that?
Well, apologetic phrases are expressions like, sorry to interrupt, excuse me, or pardon me. These phrases immediately signal to the other person that you're aware you're cutting in, but you have something important to add.
Right. And the beauty of these phrases is that they soften your interruption. You're not just barging in, you're being respectful. For example, imagine you're in a team meeting and your colleague is explaining a project timeline. You realize there's a conflict with another deadline. You could say, sorry to interrupt, but I think we need to consider the marketing deadline on Friday.
Perfect example. And notice how natural that sounds. You're not being aggressive, but you're also not waiting forever. You're making your point while still showing respect for the speaker.
Exactly. Now, here's a question I get a lot from students. When should you use sorry to interrupt versus excuse me?
Great question. Generally, sorry to interrupt is more formal and works really well in professional settings like meetings or presentations. Excuse me is a bit more casual and can work in both professional and everyday situations. If you're at a dinner party and someone is telling a story, you might say, excuse me, can I ask something quickly?
I love that distinction. And I think a lot of learners worry that apologizing makes them seem weak or unsure, but actually it's the opposite. It shows emotional intelligence and respect, which people really appreciate.
Absolutely. It's all about striking that balance between being assertive and being polite. Now, let's talk about the second technique, which is asking for permission to speak. Tom, can you explain this one?
Sure. So asking for permission is when you use phrases like, may I add something? Can I say something here? Or do you mind if I jump in? These questions give the speaker a chance to acknowledge you before you take the floor.
And this is such a smart approach because it respects the current speaker while still asserting your need to contribute. It's collaborative rather than confrontational.
Exactly. Let me give you a real life example. Last month, I was in a brainstorming session at work, and my manager was going through a list of ideas. I had a suggestion that I thought could really help, so I raised my hand slightly and said, can I add something here? My manager nodded, and I was able to share my idea without disrupting the flow.
That's perfect timing. And do you notice how Tom mentioned raising his hand slightly? Body language matters. When you combine polite language with respectful body language, you create the smooth professional interruption that people welcome.
Great point, Ria. And speaking of body language, that actually ties into our third technique, which is waiting for natural pauses. This is all about timing.
Yes, this one is so important. You don't want to interrupt someone mid-sentence or mid-thought. Instead, you listen carefully for natural breaks in the conversation. Maybe someone finishes a sentence and takes a breath, or maybe there's a brief pause when they're gathering their thoughts. That's your moment.
Exactly. And here's a phrase that works beautifully when you catch one of those pauses. You can say, I'd like to build on that, or that reminds me of something. These phrases show that you are actively listening and now you want to contribute.
I'd like to build on that because it's so positive. You're not contradicting the speaker, you're adding value to what they said. It makes the conversation feel collaborative.
Definitely. And, I think this is where a lot of English learners struggle. They're so focused on what they want to say that they forget to listen for those natural pauses. But if you can train yourself to listen actively, you'll find so many opportunities to jump in smoothly.
That's such good advice. And honestly, even native speakers sometimes interrupt at the wrong moment. So don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't go perfectly every time.
For sure. Now let's move to the fourth technique. And this one is all about using bridging phrases. Ria, what are bridging phrases?
Bridging phrases are expressions that connect what the previous person said to what you're about to say. They create this seamless transition. Examples include along those lines, on that note, or speaking of which.
These are so useful because they show that you're engaged with the conversation. You're not just waiting for your turn to talk, you're actually building on the discussion.
Right. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a meeting about customer feedback and someone mentions that customers are unhappy with delivery times. You could say, along those lines, I've also noticed complaints about packaging quality. See how that flows naturally?
Perfect. And it doesn't feel like an interruption at all. It feels like you're contributing to a collective conversation, which is exactly the vibe you want in group discussions.
Exactly. Now, Tom, let's talk about the fifth technique, which is using signal words. What do you mean by signal words?
Signal words are short, attention-grabbing words or phrases that let people know you want to speak. Common ones include actually, just to clarify, or one thing to mention. These words act like verbal cues that say, hey, I have something to add.
And they're so effective because they're brief. You're not launching into a long explanation right away. You're just signaling your intention to speak.
Right. For example, if someone says something that's not quite accurate, you could say, actually, I think the deadline is next Tuesday, not Wednesday. You're correcting them, but you're doing it gently with that signal word, actually.
I love that example. And here's a tip for listeners. When you use actually, make sure your tone is friendly and not confrontational. The word itself is neutral, but your tone can make all the difference.
That's such an important point. Tone is everything. You could say the exact same phrase in two different tones and get completely different reactions.
Absolutely. Now, let's move to the sixth technique, which is acknowledging the speaker before you interrupt. This is all about validation.
Yes. So this technique involves saying something like, that's a great point, and I'd like to add. Or, I see what you're saying, and I have a related thought. You're acknowledging what they said before you transition to your own idea.
This is so respectful because you're showing that you value their contribution. You're not dismissing them, you're building on their words.
Exactly. And people really respond well to this approach. I remember being in a meeting once where a colleague interrupted me, but she started by saying, Tom, that's a really interesting idea, and I'm wondering if we could also consider, even though she was interrupting, I didn't mind at all because she made me feel heard first.
That's the power of acknowledgement. It creates goodwill and makes people more receptive to what you have to say.
For sure. And this technique is especially useful if you disagree with someone. Instead of saying, I don't think that's right, you could say, I understand your perspective, but I see it a bit differently. Same message, but so much more diplomatic.
Yes, diplomacy is key, especially in professional settings. Now, let's talk about our seventh and final technique, which is using nonverbal cues. Tom, can you explain this one?
Absolutely. Nonverbal cues are all the physical signals you use to show you want to speak. This includes raising your hand slightly, leaning forward, making eye contact with the speaker, or even just nodding along until there's a pause.
And this is so important because sometimes you don't even need words to interrupt. Your body language can do a lot of the work for you.
Right. In more formal settings like business meetings or presentations, raising your hand is completely appropriate. It's a clear, respectful signal that you have something to say. In more casual settings, leaning forward or making eye contact might be enough.
And here's something I've noticed. When you combine nonverbal cues with verbal phrases, you become really effective at getting your voice heard. For example, you might lean forward, make eye contact, and say, "Can I add something quickly?" That combination is powerful.
Definitely. And for our listeners who are joining meetings virtually, this is a bit different. You can use the raise hand feature in Zoom or Teams, or you can unmute yourself at a natural pause and say, if I could just jump in here for a moment.
Great point. Virtual meetings do require some adjustment, but the same principles apply. Be respectful, wait for pauses, and signal your intention to speak.
Exactly. So those are our 7 techniques. Let's quickly recap them. We have apologetic phrases, asking for permission, waiting for natural pauses, using bridging phrases, using signal words, acknowledging the speaker, and using nonverbal cues.
And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to use all 7 in every conversation. Pick the ones that feel most natural to you and practice them. Over time, they'll become second nature.
That's such good advice, Ria. And I want to emphasize something for our listeners. Learning to interrupt politely isn't just about the words you use. It's about confidence and believing that your voice matters.
Absolutely. You know, Tom, I think a lot of English learners hold back in conversations because they're afraid of making mistakes or sounding rude. But the truth is, people appreciate when you contribute to a discussion, as long as you do it respectfully.
Yes. And here's something I tell my students all the time. Native speakers interrupt each other constantly. It's a normal part of conversation. The difference is that they've learned how to do it in a way that feels natural and polite.
Exactly. And you can learn that too. It just takes practice. Start with small situations like casual conversations with friends, and then gradually work your way up to more formal settings like meetings or presentations.
Great advice. And one thing I've learned over the years is that people are generally much more forgiving than we think. If you accidentally interrupt at the wrong moment or phrase something awkwardly, most people will give you grace, especially if they know you're learning English.
That's so true. And here's a little secret. Even native speakers sometimes fumble their words or interrupt at the wrong time. It's part of being human. The key is to not let fear hold you back.
Absolutely. And speaking of fear, I want to address something that comes up a lot. Some listeners have told me they worry that interrupting makes them seem pushy or aggressive, especially in cultures where interrupting is less common.
That's a really important point, Tom. Cultural differences do play a role in how we communicate. In some cultures, interrupting is seen as engaged and enthusiastic. In others, it might be seen as disrespectful.
Right. So the key is to read the room. Pay attention to how others in the conversation are behaving. If everyone is taking turns and waiting patiently, you might want to be more cautious. If people are jumping in frequently, you can feel more comfortable doing the same.
And don't forget using polite phrases like, "sorry to interrupt," or "may I add something," will almost always be well received regardless of cultural context. Those phrases are universally respectful.
For sure. Now, Ria, I want to talk about something that I think is really powerful. It's the idea of practicing these techniques in low-stakes situations before you use them in high-stakes moments.
Oh, I love this. Yes, practice is everything. If you have a big meeting coming up where you want to share your ideas, don't wait until that moment to try out these techniques for the first time.
Exactly. Practice with friends, family, or even in front of a mirror. Say the phrases out loud. Get comfortable with the words. That way, when the real moment comes, you'll feel confident and natural.
And here's another tip. Record yourself practicing. Use your phone to record a mock conversation where you practice interrupting politely. Then, listen back and see how you sound. Are you too timid? Too aggressive? Just right?
That's brilliant. I actually do this with my students sometimes, and it's amazing how much you can learn from hearing yourself. You start to notice patterns in your speech that you might not be aware of otherwise.
Absolutely. And you know, Tom, I think one of the most empowering things about learning these techniques is that they work in so many different contexts. Whether you're in a business meeting, a classroom discussion, a social gathering, or even a family dinner, these skills are valuable.
So true. And they're not just for English learners. I mean, I'm a native speaker, and I still use these techniques every day. They're just good communication skills in general.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about something practical. What should you do if you interrupt someone and realize you've done it at the wrong moment? How do you recover?
Great question. If you realize you've interrupted at an awkward time, the best thing to do is acknowledge it immediately. You can say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, please finish your thought," or "I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead." This shows that you're self-aware and respectful.
Yes, and most people will appreciate that you caught yourself. It actually makes you seem more considerate, not less.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. We all make mistakes. The important part is how we handle them. If you can gracefully acknowledge a misstep and give the floor back to the original speaker, you're doing great.
I love that. And you know, this brings up another important point. Part of interrupting politely is also knowing when not to interrupt. Sometimes the best move is to wait until the speaker is completely finished.
Yes, this is especially true if someone is sharing something emotional or personal. In those moments, interrupting can feel really insensitive, even if you have the best intentions.
Exactly. You have to use your judgment. Ask yourself, is what I have to say urgent enough to interrupt right now, or can it wait a few more seconds?
Great advice. And most of the time, waiting just a little bit longer won't hurt. In fact, it often makes your contribution more impactful because you've given the speaker their full moment.
Absolutely. Now, Tom, I want to talk about something that I think trips up a lot of English learners. It's the fear that their accent or grammar mistakes will make their interruptions seem less valid.
Oh, this is such an important topic, and I want to say this very clearly to our listeners. Your accent does not make your ideas less valuable. Your grammar mistakes do not make your contributions less important. What matters is that you're communicating clearly and respectfully.
Yes, and honestly, most people in professional settings are much more focused on the content of what you're saying than how you're saying it. If you have a good idea or an important question, people want to hear it, regardless of your accent.
Absolutely. And you know, I've worked with so many international colleagues over the years, and some of the best ideas I've ever heard have come from people who spoke English as a second or third language. Their unique perspectives are invaluable.
That's beautiful, Tom. And I think this is a good reminder that language is a tool for connection and communication. It doesn't have to be perfect to be effective.
Exactly. And the more you practice these interruption techniques, the more confident you'll become. Confidence is so much more important than perfection.
So true. Now, as we start to wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a few final thoughts. First, remember that every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect phrase. Just start trying these techniques out.
Yes. And second, be patient with yourself. Learning to interrupt politely is a skill, and like any skill, it takes time to develop. You're not going to nail it every time, and that's okay.
And third, remember that your voice matters. You have valuable ideas, questions, and perspectives to share. Don't let fear or uncertainty keep you silent.
That's such a powerful message, Ria. And I think about all the conversations I've had over the years where someone finally spoke up after being quiet for a long time, and their contribution completely changed the direction of the discussion in a positive way. Your voice can do that too.
Absolutely. And here's one more thing I want to say. Learning English isn't just about grammar rules and vocabulary. It's about finding your voice and expressing yourself with confidence. These interruption techniques are part of that journey.
I love that. And for our listeners, I want to encourage you to practice one technique this week. Just pick one from the 7 we talked about and try it out in a real conversation. See how it feels, notice how people respond.
That's perfect homework. And if you want to share your experience with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave comments on our YouTube channel or connect with us on social media.
Yes, please do. We love hearing from our listeners. Your stories and questions inspire us to keep making these episodes.
Absolutely. And remember, every time you practice speaking English, you're getting stronger and more confident. Keep going, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
Well said, Ria. So that's it for today's episode on interrupting politely in conversations. We covered 7 powerful techniques, and we hope you feel more confident about speaking up in group discussions and meetings.
Thank you so much for listening to Real English Voices. We'll see you in the next episode where we'll be talking about how to express disagreement politely in English. You won't want to miss it.
Until then, keep practicing, keep speaking, and remember that your voice matters. Take care, everyone.
Bye for now.